In this video, I am going to cover my building of the extended range fuel tanks. As you can see, I've already built the right-hand tank right here. So this video, I'm going to be going over the left tank. Basically, these extended tanks, instead of holding the standard 30 gallons, these hold, I think, 41.5, something like that. Anyway, you add about these two sections right here, and so it gives you a little bit more fuel. So rather than holding a total of 60 gallons, I'll be able to hold about 82, 83 gallons, something like that. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I've done to this tank and talk about what you're going to see in this video. Now, first thing, I do want to say, in anticipation of making this is not going to be a great how-to video. I'm going to do my usual thing where I kind of gloss over a lot of what I'm doing in this build. Vans has put out a fantastic video on how to build fuel tanks, and so they go through everything in great detail. I'm just going to kind of document my building of the fuel tanks, and I'll probably stop and show you a few things where I've differed from how Vans does it. Anyway, let's get into some of the things about this fuel tank, how I've constructed it, and some of the things that I've added to the fuel tank. So let's start with the most outboard part of the fuel tank. So Vans, the kit comes with this plastic fuel cap, and I upgraded it to a metal fuel cap. You can kind of see it right here. I'll probably show some video here of me giving you a little bit more of a close-up view of it. Anyway, the external part's metal, the little lever is made out of metal, and then the inside is plastic, and that is from the standard Vans kit. It looks a little bit nicer. Now, I bought this cap back when I had the standard tanks, so it says 30 gallons on it instead of the 41 or 42 that I'm going to have. I'm probably just going to leave it. Maybe if they come out with some that have a different label, I'll spend some more money to change them out, but I'll probably leave them as is. So this is the most inboard side of the fuel tank, and first off, you can see I've got a big balloon here. Why? Well, when you put this thing together, you kind of put this rubber sealant all over the inside to prevent any leaks, fuel leaks coming out of the fuel tank. So you need to pressure test it to make sure there's no leaks. So what you want to do is fill this thing full of air, then you go around the side, spraying it with soapy water and see if there's any air bubbles coming out. I've done that twice. So far, at least, it looks like on this tank, I don't have any leaks, and that's a good thing. The danger, though, is you can actually put too much air in your fuel tank and it will burst. So what you do is you put a balloon like this, attach it to your vent line, and if you do put too much air in your fuel tank, the balloon will pop before your fuel tank does. So the balloon's a good idea. Anyway, on this end, there's only one or two things I think I want to mention that I kind of did different a little bit from the standard plans, and I'll highlight those right now. First thing is I added a return fuel line right here. So I am anticipating using one of the electronic fuel ignition and injection and ignition products from SDS probably, and that will pump out fuel from your fuel tank, and any fuel that's not used by the engine will be pumped back into the fuel tank, so you need a return line. I used a EF2 fuel tank bung kit right here. I bought this originally intending to put it on the 30-gallon tanks and maybe installing it after I built the tanks, but I ended up installing it while I was building the tanks, because I'm pretty sure that's what I want to do. Anyway, I installed these things from the inside. You can also install it from the outside. There's also, I forget the part number, but whatever goes right here, you can use that. Anyway, that's the first thing I did, is I added a fuel return line. If I end up not going with one of the electronic fuel injection and ignition routes, I can just cap this off, no big deal. The second thing I did is, rather than use the standard fuel senders, I used these Cies fuel senders. So when I was kind of doing my research on this plane, you know, here's what the standard fuel sender looks like. It's something like this. These things are known to fail, and they're not terribly accurate. And I was mostly worried about them failing because I didn't want to come back, pull off my fuel tanks, and have to replace these things. It sounded kind of like a pain in the butt. And the Cies fuel senders are much more reliable. I think their mean time between failure is about 50,000, 80,000 hours, something like that. So they're fairly reliable. Additionally, they're also a lot more accurate. And if you were to kind of look at them, like here's one that I'm going to be putting in the left tank. The build quality is a lot nicer. There's no contact between parts, so there's nothing to wear out. This basically uses electromagnetic magic to deliver a square wave that is the frequency of which can be interpreted by your avionics to tell you how much fuel you have. Whereas in the standard fuel sender, I think there's it'll vary the voltage as it moves up and down, which it involves some contact, and that can wear out over time. So anyway, that was the first thing. I wanted the this to be something a little bit more rust that I wouldn't have to replace, and supposedly it's also a little bit more accurate. Whether or not that's a good idea, I don't know. I think the Cies products are clearly superior to the standard senders. However, they're wildly more expensive. And so is that the added benefits of it justified by the cost? I don't know, but I bought them anyway. Just to get an idea, I think this thing right here, this fuel sender cost me like 50 bucks. This fuel sender right here is about $600, so it's more than 10 times as much. And in fact, not only did I buy 2 of them, 1 for each wing, I actually bought 4. I have 2 in each wing. 1 right here, and then 1 at the other end of the fuel tank to kind of measure when the fuel's, it's measured the full tank of gas, I guess. The wings are at an angle, so if I just had 1 right here, I wouldn't be able to tell the level of fuel for the first 20 gallons in the tank. I could only be able to tell accurately the fuel level in the last 20, 25 gallons. So between the fuel sender right here and 1 at the end of the tank, I'll be able to have an accurate measurement of how much fuel I have in the tank at all times, so I like that. Additionally, on the inside of this, rather than using nut plates to mount the sender, I have a nut ring, and I bought this. I forgot the vendor where I got it, but anyway, this nut ring, when you put it on the inside and seal it with tank sealant, it allows this to be taken on and off really easily. I have a gasket right here, rather than putting Pro Seal or the tank sealant on the sender, on the external part of it. I'm using a gasket, and so I can take these on and off pretty easily. And this nut ring right here, when you put it on the inside, it seals it up pretty good, much better than what you would get with nut plates. So I like that. Also, you might notice, well, you probably aren't noticing it, but this is the right fuel tank, and this fuel sender is labeled as the left fuel tank. Well, one thing that I found is that, well, either Cies mislabeled its fuel senders, or the bolt pattern on the this part right here wasn't what Cies anticipated. Regardless, I had to switch them, so my right-hand fuel sender is going on my left tank. My left-hand fuel sender is going on my right tank. And you can tell because the upmost position is supposed to have a high frequency and the downmost position is supposed to have a low frequency, and that was reversed. So anyway, I didn't find that out until after I had actually mounted the fuel senders in the tank, and then I was really glad that I didn't Pro Seal them in place because it was really pretty easy to just pull these off and switch them out. Finally, I have, using Deutsche connectors, these things are very weather resistant and pretty robust and easy to work with, so I've got that kind of wired up. Anyway, last thing you'll notice is I have primed the outside parts of the fuel tank. Obviously, you don't want to prime the inside of your fuel tank, but I've primed all the outside. I've noticed a lot of builders, even those who prime everywhere else in the plane, a lot of times people aren't priming the fuel tank. I decided to. None of the primer is going on the inside of the tank, but all the external parts are primed. So anyway, this fuel tank is pretty much done. I do have to kind of put some tie-down things to tie down some of the wiring, secure it against the fuel tank a little bit better. But other than that, this fuel tank is by and large done. So let's get started on the left-hand fuel tank. Okay, I've got all the parts laid out that I need to build the left fuel tank. Well, most of the big parts anyway. I'm not laying out the small parts like nut plates and things like that. As you can see, most of the stuff is already primed and ready to go. It's for the most part deburred, probably 80–90% the way there. Anyway, right here behind me, you can see the inside of the tank skin itself. I have primed around the edges, taking care to make sure the primer doesn't intrude onto the interior of the tank. Here I've got, for example, a bunch of ribs. These, of course, are not primed because they're all going to be on the interior of the tank. With the exception, of course, the ribs that are going to be on the end. I have the parts that are inside the tank not primed, then the exterior parts are primed and ready to go. I have the tank baffle primed, ready to go. I still need to process this J channel, but I'll do that when I cleco this thing together. I've got the Z brackets primed and ready to go, and again, any part that's going to be touching sealant or any part of the aluminum that's going to be touching sealant, I didn't prime that. This AXO primer I think is pretty fuel resistant or fuel proof, but I'm worried about fuel eating through the primer, so I want the primer to bond to the bare aluminum when there is I want the tank sealant to stick to the bare aluminum rather than primer whenever the fuel is meeting the tank sealant. I also have, of course, my Cies senders. This is the inboard most Cies sender. This is the outboard most. It attaches onto the tank baffle at the rear, and I still need to drill a big hole for that. I have rubber gaskets that I'm going to use on the outside to help seal this when I stick it on. A lot of builders like to use tank sealant. I'm using the rubber gasket. And then rather than putting nut plates on the inside and then putting mounds of sealant around those nut plates to make sure I don't have any leaks, I'm using these nut rings. And these nut rings will enable me to kind of get a better seal. And when I take the senders on and off, if I ever do, the act of screwing or unscrewing the sender won't break any of the sealant that I have. So that I would have had if I had used nut plates. So I like these nut rings. Anyway, the rest of these parts are just miscellaneous stuff. Here I have wrapped together a bunch of stiffeners that are going to be on, for the most part, the bottom of the fuel tank. I have this big part thingy-do right here with a little twisty-do right there. And then some miscellaneous stuff, fuel filters and some other things like that. Anyway, this kit it comes match drilled, but it's not final size drilled. So what I need to do now is assemble this whole thing, which I probably would do anyway, even if they were match drilled and final size drilled already, just because I want to make sure the fit is good. Then I'm going to click it all together, final size drill everything, take it apart, do whatever other processing on the parts that I need to, probably dimple the skin as well as the ribs, and then stick it together. The tricky part about making the fuel tank when it comes to riveting it together is you don't just rivet it together, you use tank sealant. And you'll see it in the video later. But it's basically this rubber cement goopy stuff that you put between ribs and the skin and things like that, just to kind of make sure it's all sealed, so there's no leaks through the rivet holes, through the rivets, which there otherwise would be. And this stuff is a big mess. Imagine like a burnt marshmallow, when you roast marshmallows, it's kind of gooey. Everything that gooey marshmallow touches, it absolutely sticks to. Well, that's basically tank sealant. Anything it touches, it sticks to, and it's a big mess. Well, I'm probably overstating it. It's not too bad. I was really nervous to put this together initially, but actually dealing with the tank sealant, as long as you go slow and kind of be controlled, you get the hang of it. It's not too bad. Anyway, that's what's going to complicate me actually riveting it together, so I'm not sure how I'm going to film that. I don't want to get tank sealant on my camera, but I'll still probably take a lot of time-lapse video of that. Anyway, enough talking. I want to get to work, so what I'm going to do now is just basically Cleco this whole left tank together and go from there. So I finished final size drilling all the holes that I need to on the left fuel tank. I did have to drill a hole in the rear baffle to fit the outboard most fuel sender. They did give me a nice paper template in order to know where to drill that hole. It was a little bit loose, but this isn't exactly a high precision operation. So the hole is basically where it needs to be. Anyway, the next step I need to do is just basically disassemble this thing. I kind of need to deburr some of the holes that I just final sized drilled. Need to dimple a whole bunch of the holes, kind of scuff it up, getting it ready for assembly with the tank sealant. But yeah, I'm gonna take it apart, prep the parts, and then we're gonna start riveting this thing together with the tank sealant. So that's what's up next. At this point, I've cleaned up all the parts that I need to on the fuel tank. I've fitted everything together, final size drilled, all that kind of stuff. Everything processed and ready to go. So the only thing I need to do now is rivet the fuel tank together. Basically, riveting the fuel tank together is just like riveting anything together, except for you need to get some tank sealant and squish it on the pieces that you're mating together. And then rivet together, and so it seals it up. It's a little bit tricky to work with, or at least not pleasant to work with. Not as bad as some people seem to think it is, in my view, but it is tricky to work with. This stuff, once you mix it up, it's like this really thick goo that just sticks to everything. It's kind of like marshmallow. If you ever roasted marshmallows and it gets melty, it's like that, except for thicker and possibly even stickier. Anyway, so I have a table here set up for the mixing and prepping of all this stuff. People online have come up with some very creative ways as to what you want to put this stuff on when you mix it. In Vans video, where they have a pretty good video on how to put together fuel tanks. The guy there uses some aluminum scrap. I've seen other people use different things. I just simply use paper plates. Once you mix it up and you're done with it, you can just throw the plate away. I've also got gloves that I use to keep my hands clean. Basically, I put these gloves on, and then I have a second pair of gloves, because you're constantly going to be wanting taking off and putting on gloves. And I found that if you have one pair of gloves on, your hands kind of get sweaty. So if you take it off and try to put on a new pair, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So I use two pair and just shed the top layer. I have acetone to clean it up, Q-tips to kind of clean things up, paper towels, stuff like that. What I prefer to do is I have a whole box here full of different sized popsicle sticks and things like that. And so I'll mix things up on a plate. Then I kind of get the popsicle sticks, and I, for the most part, squish all the tank sealant into this 60 millimeter syringe. You can get these kind of things on Amazon. And then I find this is really easy to use to kind of apply tank sealant wherever you want it in a very controlled way. So I do like using this. I also have a pneumatic air-powered squeezer thing, but I've only found that that's really useful when I want to put on the rear baffle. Is that what it's called? Anyway, but other than that, these things are preferable. I also, following the Vans instruction video, and if you really want to know how to put together fuel tanks, watch the Vans video on how to do it. But the guy there used a aluminum tube to kind of seal the back side of rivets, the shop head. And that's essentially what I use too, except for I flared the end to kind of make it a little bigger blob that I kind of put on there. Also, to mix this stuff, you need to have it roughly be a 1-to-10 ratio. There's probably a little bit of leeway you have on there, but I want it to be as close as I can. What I found is that your standard scales only measure grams in whole units, and a lot of times, say you want to make 20 grams of this stuff, it's hard to tell, do you have 1.5 grams or 2.5 grams of this black stuff that you're supposed to mix in with the 20 grams of this other stuff. So I bought a scale that measures fractions of grams. They're pretty cheap. I don't even know what brand this is. You can get them on Amazon, but that's been really useful, especially when you're mixing together small batches of sealant. Anyway, so that's it for this. Really, it's not too complicated. It's not too bad. It's sticky, difficult to work with in some ways, but all in all, putting the tank together, sealant on, and riveting stuff together with it, it's not too bad. Just a little messy. I found that when I apply the parts to the tank, that fuel tank sealant tends to get everywhere. So in the last tank that I built, I cleaned everything up with acetone before I closed the tank up. I don't know if that's necessary from a cosmetic point of view. It's obviously not necessary because no one ever sees the inside of the fuel tank. But I was kind of freaked out at the possibility that maybe there's some chunk of sealant that's going to fall off the side of the wall and somehow get in the fuel line and block things. Plus, I'm a little bit OCD. I just want things to look neat, even the stuff that I'm not going to see. So I cleaned it up with acetone really good, and that was kind of a pain in the butt. This time around, I'm putting in tape like you see right here. So when I fit parts and get them all riveted in and sealed up, I can just tear off the tape, and that'll hopefully save me some time on cleaning. Anyway, so I'm going to get started. The first thing I need to do is rivet some stiffeners to the skin, and then I basically need to rivet the ribs in and close it up. I don't intend to, I may change my mind a little bit down the road, but I don't intend to film most of me putting the fuel tank together. Again, this stuff is so sticky and I don't want to handle my camera while I'm doing it. So the video is probably going to resume with me showing you the finished fuel tank. Anyway, I'm going to get started riveting this stuff together. All right, so I finished pro sealing and riveting on these stiffeners inside the tank. I also, on the tank sides, I kind of put on the nut ring and all the other things that I need to attach fuel return lines, fuel lines, a vent line, stuff like that. Anyway, I was going to try to see if I could film any of this, but as soon as you start dealing with this tank sealant, everything gets gooey, and I'm not touching my DSLR with gooey hands. So next step is I need to put this back in the cradle. I need to basically rivet the ribs in with the tank sealant. I'm not going to film any of that. So I don't know how long it's going to take me. I usually work on it half an hour here, 2 hours there. But the next thing you're going to see me is sitting by a fuel tank with the ribs all riveted in. And just like that, I finished riveting all the ribs and other things inside the tank, complete with all the tank sealant all over it and all that kind of stuff. It took me about 2 weeks. I was only doing a rib or two a day, things here and there. But now it's pretty much done. So the only thing that I have left to do is to take this rear baffle, put it on the back, and seal up the tank. Everything went pretty smoothly. When I first started making these tanks, I thought it would be great to work on some parts that I didn't have to prime, because prepping and priming parts really takes a lot of time and effort. But as it turns out, and probably not surprisingly in hindsight, working with tank sealant is much more difficult than working with primer. It's not that bad, actually. Some people say it's really bad and it stinks really bad. Other people will say that, it's not so bad. I found it was kind of somewhere in the middle. As long as you're going slowly and taking your time, I suppose it's not so bad. But boy, is it tedious. So I've got everything plumbed in. I have my fuel return line. I'm thinking of using electronic fuel ignition and injection, so I'm going to need a return line, and I have something plumbed in for that. I have the vent line all installed. The instructions make it look like it's going to be completely straight, and I did everything I could to try to make sure it was straight, just because I wanted that piece of, I don't know. Once I seal this thing up, I'm never going to be looking at it again on the inside, of course. Well, hopefully not. But I still wanted it to look nice for whatever reason. And it was straight enough, I suppose. But I got everything put in. Everything looks good. The nut rings are in. That makes taking removing the senders makes it easier down the road if I need to, and all that. I also made an effort to try to keep the interior as clean as I could. There is one instance where some sealant, not tank sealant, but some sealant that someone incorrectly put on some of the fuel connections, came loose and clogged up the fuel line and basically caused an RV10 to crash. And I don't want that. Now, I'm not too worried about that happening here because there is a large particle filter at the bottom of the fuel tank, and then it's got to go through at least 2 more fuel filters before it gets to the engine. But still, I tried to clean up the interior so I wouldn't have, I don't know, in my imagination, I'm thinking of tank sealant chunking off and gumming things up somewhere. But, my idea was that I could make it really, really clean. It's really, really tough to do that. As what I have here is as clean as I could have made it. This stuff is really, really sticky, and it just sticks and goops to everything that it touches, even however slightly, which I guess is what you want. But anyway, last thing I need to do on this, for now anyway, is take this rear baffle. I already have the nut ring installed right here and a fuel level thing at the end. I just need to put this on and seal the whole thing up, and then after that I just need to install the fuel senders, wire those, and then hopefully I'm done with the fuel tank. I'll probably do a video on this later. I do want the sealant to sit for a week or 2 before I do leak testing, probably 2 or 3 weeks. This stuff can take a while to set up, especially it's a little chilly right now, and it can take at least a week before it really starts to get solid. It stays tacky for a couple days after you put it on. So I'll probably do a separate video where I leak test this. My left fuel tank, which is behind me, or excuse me, my right fuel tank, which is behind me, I couldn't find any leaks on it, but when I put the balloon on it over a couple days, the balloon gets a little bit smaller, and so I'm probably going to leak test that again too. But once I'm satisfied the tanks have no leaks, I'm going to put them on the wings and let it go. And move on to the fuselage, which I'm looking forward to. So that's all I have left to do. So the next thing you're going to see in the video is me saying that I've put on the rear baffle. All right, I've put in the rear baffle on the left fuel tank. There's only 3 things that I need to do in order to complete this fuel tank. As you can see, I still have clecos holding the rear baffle onto the skin. I didn't dimple where the rear baffle meets the skin, and so I'm gonna wait until this tank sealant cures, machine countersink, and then rivet that rear baffle in, probably a week or 2 from now. The second thing I need to do is I need to wire up the fuel senders and install those. And then finally, the third thing, I need to leak test it. I'm not going to show any of that in this video. I think I'm just going to end it with this. But basically, I'm pretty much done. I'm excited not to have to use tank sealant ever again on this build, hopefully, at least when it comes to putting together fuel tank parts. You can use that tank sealant as kind of an epoxy, and I think it's used elsewhere. But for the most part, I'm not going to have to work with this stuff ever again, and I'm excited to move on to the fuselage. Overall, these extended range fuel tanks were fantastic, easy to put together. Building the tank itself, you're only adding an extra 2 ribs, so it's actually fabricating the extended range fuel tank is really no different from building the standard Vans tanks. The only difficulty was kind of modifying the outboard leading edges in order to accept the extended range tanks. But that wasn't too difficult. So if you were interested in adding some range to your aircraft, prior to this modification, you had to have, like, I think Whiskey Tango fuel tanks out on the edge of the wings or something like that. As far as I can tell, this option is by far superior. It's so much simpler, so much easier to install, so much less complicated. Anyway, I'm going to end this video with that. I'll probably do a video where I'm going to leak test both tanks. I've already leak tested the right tank, but I'm not convinced there's no leaks, so I'm going to do it again. But that's all I want to talk about in this video, so I'm just going to end it here.